Hello, welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth. This is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We are still early in Season 2, kind of midway through Season 2 now. We've watched The Other 48 Days. We also have the second part of our recent conversation with Damon Lindelof.
You've heard of him. He's the co-creator of the show.
Let's get to it.
So as always, we start with our hot takes. Rosie, what is your hot take about The Other 48 Days?
Not a spicy hot take this week, but a take nonetheless. Mr. Echo spends 40 days in silence.
He does.
After the first day, we see him have like two interactions. One where he's caring for the kids and then asks Cindy to care for the kids. And then one where he tells various people that he will pray for them. And then he just goes quiet. And it's not totally clear to me whether he goes quiet because as like an atonement for the others that he has killed, or if he's doing so just as like a fast kind of thing. As we will come to know, Mr. Echo is a Catholic priest. Fasting is
sort of
ish, in a roundabout way. And fasting is relatively common in Catholic and many religious traditions as a way to like hope, as a way to like powerfully pray for something. And I think that's kind of what he's doing here. I'm not totally sure, but I think it's kind of cool that it seems like not that it's a particularly useful thing, but it's just so counter to what Ana Lucia is doing.
I read it the exact same way, actually. I read it as atonement, and I also thought the 40 days, that there was sort of a biblical ring to that.
Well, there is.
Right? Because isn't that everything's 40 days in the Bible? Like,
Jesus goes, in the New Testament, Jesus goes into the desert to fast and pray for 40 days before he goes to Jerusalem, where he will die. And that's where he's tempted by the devil. And the devil, like, takes him up onto the rooftops and says, like, everything the light touches could be yours. I'm sorry, that's from The Lion King. That's not what Satan says.
I think that should definitely be in the Bible.
You know, in various temptations, and Jesus says no or whatever. But yeah, 40 days is a biblical period.
Right, and I'm looking it up now, and it was also the number of days Moses was on Mount Sinai receiving the Torah and the law, which is the other thing I was trying to think of.
Thank you.
Anyway. Oh, and God caused it to rain for 40 days and 40 nights when he did the flood. That was the other thing. I knew there was some Old Testament stuff going on. Yes, I think it was atonement, and I think that there was a religious aspect to it. Although interesting how it ends, which we'll get to.
Yeah. Do you have a hot take?
I do. It's the sequence at the end of this episode was just so remarkable to me, where they cut forward through time and sort of get you through those last couple of days that we've already seen
recently.
Yeah, and what was most remarkable to me about it was how when Sawyer and Jin and Michael show up in there, it suddenly feels like these guys who we've spent the last season and a half with, like suddenly they're a sideshow to the main show of Ana Lucia and Echo in the Tale section, and it made me realize that even just across the space of this one episode, that I became so engrossed by the story of what happened to the Tale section that after 45 minutes of this, it feels like I've been watching a show about these people.
Yeah.
And suddenly, whenever our main cast shows back up, it's like, oh yeah, like these guys are there too on the island. And I didn't expect to react that way. And I similarly, like a minute later, as they're getting to the sequence where we ended with them with Shannon getting shot, then I remembered, oh yeah, like this is leading up to Ana Lucia shooting Shannon, and I'd really like not been thinking about that. And it just occurred to me like that in a way, this whole episode is really the story of why Shannon gets killed, like, because it does such a good job of explaining, why it is that they're in that place where Ana Lucia pulls the trigger when she hears a noise. But it serves that purpose, but also feels like it's just, it also could have nothing to do with that, and this story would just be so compelling on its own. I was so impressed by this episode and I realized it, in those final moments there.
Great. Well, that's a very convenient transition into talking about the meat of the episode.
What to you is the meat of the episode?
A couple of things. One is just the overwhelming sense of fear that you feel watching this episode. Like, as you said, it's sort of structured as what put Ana Lucia in the place where she would accidentally shoot Shannon in the jungle. And it's this, like, paranoia that has overtaken this group, and rightfully so. I don't know if you call it paranoia when it's clearly justified, but people have been taken from them in the middle of the night. Like, they have watched Echo kill some of the others. Ana Lucia has personally killed one of the others. In what's her exchange with Goodwin on the mountain is, like, very scary and very intense.
When they're passing the knife back and forth,
and he's peeling the apple.
You're one, oh my God!
And she explains, she lays out her whole case of,
you ran out of the jungle 10 minutes after the crash. You weren't wet. You were never even in the ocean.
whew, oh boy. I had the shivers. And Goodwin, too, is very scary. Like, I'd forgotten that we see him kill Nathan when he helps him out of the pit and tells him to run to the beach and then just, like, snaps his neck. Like, whew. Like,
yeah, I remembered that he killed Nathan, but I didn't remember how and how sudden it was.
Yeah.
Really makes your skin crawl.
Well, and it's the same feeling I got in the Ethan Rom episodes. It really is. It's... this guy gives me the creeps and I don't quite know why. Oh, wow, now we're seeing this guy in a whole different light. Everybody please get the fuck away from this guy. But then, of course, Ana Lucia ends up killing him, so that's...
Thank goodness for that.
I guess.
I personally felt that this was an Ana Lucia episode.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a flashback. And the next episode is actually an Ana Lucia episode, isn't it?
It is. And we'll have on, by the way, Leonard Dick, who wrote that episode, Collision. So we'll be hearing more from him next week about Ana Lucia's backstory.
Good tease.
Tease. No, I felt... You sort of joked about this last week that we'll come to like Ana Lucia, and I sort of disagreed with you. But actually, yeah, like, I did like her watching this episode.
She's compelling, if nothing else. And she...
That's right. I mean, I spent a lot of this episode sort of internally comparing her to Jack.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in the sense that she assumes leadership.
She does, and but there are some places, like when she makes the promise to Emma, of like, we're going to get you back to your mom, I promise. That felt like such a Jack moment of, like, making this big promise to someone who's vulnerable that, like, there's almost no chance you're going to be able to keep.
Right, and yet she follows up on it several times, right? She keeps asking about what happened to the kids. She asks Goodwin, are the kids okay?
But she's, like, going... Again, like, to me that all feels like Jack. Like, she's going to these extreme lengths to try to do something that's probably going to be impossible because she told someone she would.
Yeah, but in fairness, that's the only instance we see of that, whereas Jack, we see that time and time again. But
that's true.
But no, I agree with that. And, I mean, she does become half of her own volition, I think, and half... just because of the group dynamic. She becomes the leader because people look to her as the leader.
It's true.
And they start to ask her what to do, and she starts to assign roles and responsibilities, and she's the one who makes the decision about leaving the beach or not leaving the beach. And she's the one who assumes responsibility for the group's safety in terms of figuring out who this mole is, right? They kind of know that there's a mole within the group, but they don't know who. And yeah, she's wrong. But she's the one. But at least she's doing something. I don't know if I'd go that far, but she is the person who is throwing people into pits and taking them. Like, she is assuming that risk herself. Like, when she takes Goodwin into the jungle, like, she knows at that point, or she thinks she knows that he is one of the others.
But interestingly, this time she doesn't just act; she wants to be sure.
Right.
Like I think she puts herself at risk there by taking the time and asking him questions and like.
Oh, she certainly
draws
does.
him out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think comes from a place of guilt about Nathan. I think it probably is informed by the things we will learn about her training as a police officer. I think it's a little bit of personal pride. Like, she wants to be sure that she's right. But she doesn't bring anybody. She doesn't ask Echo to go kill him. She doesn't ask anybody to do the dirty work for her, right? She assumes it herself. And I think there's like a kind of nobility in that.
I think there is too. And I think in terms of her being smart and wanting to be sure, like, and this is a way where I think that she is different from Jack in a positive way. I thought the moment where Goodwin takes her out to see Bernard in the tree, and Goodwin's like, "We've got to get up there," and Ana Lucia's response is, "No, let's wait." Not that we don't know who he is, but that she wants him to unbuckle and hold on to the branch because she knows the chair's going to fall. That was a moment where I felt like, okay, Jack wouldn't have stopped to think; he would have just
been
acted.
halfway up the tree, yeah,
right before, and then the chair would have fallen out and Bernard would have died.
Yeah.
But Ana Lucia stopped and thought and made the smart choice. And this is my hindsight, which I'm going to slip in here into the conversation now. But I was reminded very much of in season 5, in Darmaville, when he's James at that point, when Sawyer is sort of the man in charge. And he makes that speech to Jack about why he's sitting and reading at night, and he said, "Well, Jack, your problem was you never stopped to think; you just acted, and a bunch of people ended up dead. I'm going to stop and I'm going to think things through, and save you all." And I was reminded of that, of this moment where here's Ana Lucia, she wants to act, but first she stops, she thinks, she makes the smart choice, and then she saves Bernard.
Strong
I was impressed
reference. Strong.
Thank
reference.
you. I was proud of that one. What did you make of Ana Lucia and Echo this episode? Something I'm curious about.
About each of them as individuals, or about their relationship?
About their relationship. I thought there were some interesting interactions between them.
Yeah, particularly the end of what is kind of the other 48 Days storyline, which is Echo breaking his quote-unquote fast, and Ana Lucia finally crying and, mourning what's happened here. And that is a really interesting exchange.
I agree.
I did get the feeling that Echo was acting maybe more like a priest than we ever see him act in another context. Like, he's not imposing, but he's sort of encouraging her to confront sort of the tragedy that everybody's dealing with that she hasn't confronted yet. Like, she's kept this whole thing at bay and has been so focused on protecting the group and identifying the mole and getting everybody to safety that she hasn't stopped to think about what she's lost and what they've all lost. And I think, if I remember correctly, right before that scene, she says to somebody,
"This is our life now. Get used to it."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that's the moment where she's really reckoning with, holy shit, this is my life now. And again, as we do with all the characters, we want to think about the things that she has just dealt with and is still in the process of dealing with when she gets on to Oceanic Flight 815, which in this case was she was pregnant and she lost the baby. And she killed a man and lost her job. So, like, there's a lot of shit that, again, just like Jack with his father, just like all of these other characters, she was in the midst of kind of a whole separate drama when the plane crashed. And now she has to deal with all of that, as well as the shock of, again, this is our life now. And I think that's the first time when she does it, although, of course, the plot quickly moves on from there because Jin shows up.
I was definitely surprised to see her, crying and breaking down, because I'd forgotten about that scene, and I forgot that we ever did get to see her that vulnerable.
Me too.
And the way you've explained it, I mean, it makes complete and total sense why she would be in that place and how she got there. But it's still so surprising to see after everything we've seen from Ana Lucia so far.
Yeah. Did you have thoughts on that scene? Or on Anna and Echo's relationship in general?
No, I was compelled by their relationship. I thought that she had an interesting amount of respect for him.
Yeah,
even
I agree.
as she saw him not talk. And I don't know where, if you're thinking about anything in particular, but there was this little moment that I was struck by where, when she decides she's going to throw Nathan, when she throws Nathan in the pit and then tells everyone about it, she looks at Echo and says, "Do you have a problem with this?" Even though he's not talking and is not part of this at all, and even though she knows he's not going to respond, she still like wants at least his tacit approval of it, which I thought was interesting.
He's certainly the person that she respects the most and possibly trusts the most.
I wonder how he earns that. Or I wonder what it is in her eyes that makes him sort of worthy in that way. Is it that he kills the others, or is it something else? Because most of the time we just see her like being kind of pissed at him.
Right. I mean, but she's low-grade pissed at everyone, right? Like in the same way that Sawyer is a dick toward everyone.
Anna's default is just, you're annoying
kind
to
of
me.
Pissed, which, fair enough. No, I think it is that he kills the others on the first night, which I think Anna probably sees as proof of loyalty in a time where she doesn't know who she can trust. Like, he killed those people and she basically saw him do it. And I think that shows her, like, this is definitely somebody who's on our team. I also think she respects the silence fast. Like, in a weird way. Like, everybody else is gossiping and complaining and kind of stressing her out. And I think that's probably how she sees it. Like, I think, based on what we know about Ana Lucia, I'm putting, thoughts into her head, but I think what she probably is thinking is, like, I wish these people would just shut up.
I could totally see that being her track in her mind.
Echo has shut up for weeks on end.
I love that.
So I think there's probably, like, that, gives her a certain respect toward him as well, I would guess. Again, no evidence for this, but this is just what I read into it. But no, I think she respects him. I think he recognizes that she is the leader and wants to sort of do what he can to, like, shepherd her. I'm using a lot of priest words with regard to Echo, but he's being very, like, priestly in this. Like, do what he can to sort of make sure she doesn't go astray. But he has no interest in being the leader of this group, right? So
that's true. I definitely had not thought of him in that scene with her at the creek as being priestly, but that I see it now that you've said it.
Yeah, it's much more of like an older, like, more respected figure. Like, there's nothing romantic in it. There's not really even a friendship in it. But yeah, I don't know. That's how I saw it.
Makes me really wish we could have spent more time with both of these characters.
Yeah. Conveniently. That could be a nice transition into the next question I asked Damon Lindelof, if you want to take this in that direction.
I do. We have more from our interview with Damon Lindelof. And I should point out, by the way, also, as long as we're talking about Anna and Echo, that he did mention last week that one of the reasons, or that the reason they wrote Ana Lucia off the show was because Michelle Rodriguez only wanted to do the one season, which was actually not something I was aware of. They did a really good job with just the one season of her, of building this character.
I agree.
But yes, we've got more from our interview with Damon Lindelof. One note here, reminder, this interview was, we recorded it a couple of weeks ago, the day before there was this Lost concert in Hollywood that I was going to be attending. And so we referenced that in the interview, so just a reminder that's what he's talking about.
Working in television feels like such a strange challenge to me because you do have to deal with folks who want different things. And that might make you feel like there were certain characters who didn't get the sort of ending or the sort of resolution that you wanted them to get or that you had hoped they would get. Are there any stories that you would have resolved differently if you could have?
I think that's a very fair question, but it's also, the answer, it's so unfair to my past self to say that the answer is yes. I mean, the answer is both yes and no. It's yes in the sense of the show is not a perfect show by any stretch of the imagination. There are things that could have been improved in any number of ways. That said, it's not fair to anyone to kind of say, we should have done it differently because for a couple reasons. Reason number one is you have to make mistakes in order to learn and evolve, and so there's just no version of not making mistakes. And then the other thing is, and this is not an excuse, it's just a reality, we made 25 hours of Lost in the first season and 24 in the second and 23 in the third. And this idea that, that we had time to sit around and do a lot of advanced planning, the time just didn't exist. All we could do was say that it's Monday and a week from today we have to have a 55-page script that's going to be shooting. And you do that, over and over and over again, and when something doesn't go the way that you wanted to, you can't grind the machinery to a halt and just stop and take a breath and fix it. You just have to keep moving forwards. And so I know that there are many amazing television shows out there, but like if you only have to do 10 or 13 episodes a season, there's a lot more time to craft and to take space between seasons and plan. And so I wish, if I had any regret, it's just that I wish that we were doing like 13 episodes of Lost a season. It doesn't mean that the other 10 episodes were shitty. It's just like I kind of feel like for the show and the premise of the show and our story plan for that show, we shouldn't have made 1 hours of it. We should have made like 80 hours of it.
Well, it would be interesting to see Lost made today.
That was out of our hands,
Right. Yeah, and that's not a criticism. I think that speaks that says more about network television than it does about Lost.
Sure. And and now I think that there are shows like, The Good Place is a show that I love. And they make 13 episodes of that a season. And that's exactly the amount of episodes they should make. Like for a premise like that, because you burn story fuel. It is a show that feels like the characters are moving towards something, in the same way that Lost was. Not just are the characters moving towards something, but there's mystery and mystery resolution. And the longer the show goes, the shaggier the dog becomes, as we're all aware.
Yeah.
And it can lead to very exhilarating moments. I kind of feel like I think that it's widely agreed that the weakest creative stretch of episodes for the entire series is kind of the first half of season 3. That's certainly something that we feel as the makers of the show. But I also feel like the season 3 finale may be my favorite episode of the show. And so like you kind of you have to take the good and take the bad. You take them both, and there you have the facts of life.
Yeah.
So we just got one or two other questions. So talking about things that maybe didn't go quite the way you planned them to, but were still super valuable. Could you talk a little bit about just the decision to introduce Henry Gale, since we'll be getting to that soon, and sort of how you figured out, or when you figured out that you realized, like, okay, this guy's going to stick around and be the leader of the others?
Yeah, we knew we had already done the Ethan story. So that the idea that the others were kind of out there, that there was this group there, and coming into season 2, and especially ending season 1 with Walt's abduction, we kind of knew that Mr. Friendly was not going to be the leader of the others, even as great as MC Gainey was. And so we started talking about this idea of who's running the others, who's in charge, and then that coalesced with the idea that they were going to capture one. Rousseau was going to capture one and turn them over, and that this guy would be kept in captivity in the hatch. And then Carlton and I were both fans of The Practice, and Emerson had just the previous year had done this amazing stretch on The Practice where the whole character was like, is this guy a crazy psychopathic sociopathic murderer or isn't he? And it was just like, we just got it. Let's just get that guy. He's just magnetic. And then he came in, and his second or third day of shooting, we got the dailies, and we were like, oh, he's in charge. This guy is definitely the leader of the others. And I think we left a back door for ourselves, because he's referring to the leader in the third person as a possibility that he is not the one in charge. But by the time we got to Got Any Milk, it was undeniable.
Mm-hmm. We talked to Michael recently and asked him, and he said that he didn't know anything about what was going on. Why the choice not to tell him who he really was?
I think that was sort of a basic management style that we applied to all of the actors, and it sort of it provided them with the freedom to just kind of play whatever was on the page, and it allowed us as writers to watch what they were doing, and then it would inspire future writing. But I think if Michael had come to us and said, I need to know, who I am and where I came from and everything about me, we would have done our best to answer the question to the best of our ability. But, I think that the part of the excitement of the show was just kind of living in present time, and particularly for characters to, when they were playing flashback stories, know who they were beforehand. So I think that when we hired Elizabeth Mitchell, we were like, yeah, she's a fertility doctor. And we believe that the others basically brought her here and recruited her to solve their fertility problems. Do you need to know anything else? And she's like, nope, I'm good. And with Evangeline, she was like, should I know what Kate did, like why she's a fugitive? And we were like, we think that she killed her abusive stepfather, but we're still working on the details of why she did it. But she did it to protect herself or her mother. And Evie was like, got it, And so we would give them sort of narrow answers, but guys like Terry O'Quinn and Michael Emerson, they never asked. They just played it. You would think at a certain point they would come to us and say, I kind of want to know more about my character, but they didn't. And they played it with confidence, and it's actually kind of a life lesson, which is just, the greatest piece of advice that I ever got about show running in those early days was just pretend you know what you're doing until you realize that you know what you're doing. And I'm, just between us, I'm still pretending, but I think I've manifested. Everyone else is pretty convinced that I know what I'm doing. So I'll just keep proceeding as I have been. I think acting is the same way, but quite literally, just they are pretending. But I'll be darned, we had some incredible actors on that show. We were pretty blessed.
Yeah. I know you've talked about Lost hundreds and hundreds of times over the last 14 years, but is there anything you wish fans would ask you, or that you wish you got to talk about more that you don't tend to get asked?
Oh man, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's all been covered.
Yeah.
There's no area of the show that I feel is unturned. I will say, I do feel there's been a lot of focus in terms of the areas of media interest and fan interest on the storytelling. And that makes sense, of course, because the show is such a big, sprawling story. Warts and all, that's what they're interested in. But I do feel like the actual production of the show, how it was made, is quite a miracle. And I give all the credit there to Jack Bender and our incredible crew in Hawaii. And when people talk about how cinematic the show was, but when you think about the season 3 finale, for example, where Charlie dies, and we're doing the flash forwards involving Jack, and there's major action set pieces, underwater action, a full-on crazy fight sequence on a beach, and Jack Bender basically did all that and shot it all in 10 or 11 days in Hawaii, after having completed an entire season of 22 other episodes. Or you think about the logistics of the raft launch, and saying we built that raft and actually pushed those actors out into the Hawaiian, into the ocean, and they had to do it. That was just an afternoon's worth of work, and all the emotional moments of, that you'll see at the concert. I think Michael's doing that tomorrow night, the raft.
Oh, great. Good.
I think he is. I have to
He'd better.
But But it's just like, I just think nobody wants to talk about how the magic trick was done. You just want to say like, oh my God, that was amazing. But I'm really in awe of how the show was executed, and can't really take credit for any of it. I certainly went back and forth to Hawaii a bit, but but Jack and the other amazing directors who he supervised, and our incredible production designers, and the tireless efforts of everybody in Hawaii to make to bring those crazy ideas to life was a miracle. There's no other word for it, and I know it's not as sexy as the storytelling, but I guess to answer your question, I wish more people were like, how did you drown Charlie? Like, what were the logistics of doing that? Like, wasn't Dominic, in danger? Like, that kind of stuff. Just the movie making.
Who did that? Who drowned Charlie? Actually, I am interested.
Who drowned him?
Yeah, who was responsible for that magic trick?
Well, it was Bender directed the episode, and we just built a tank, and we put we put Dominic in that room that's filling up with water, just as you see it, and he did it. He held his breath, and I think there was a scuba diver in there with him with a tank that basically gave him air between takes. And he did 3 takes and was just utterly incredible. But we built that tank on a soundstage.
This is the last thing I was going to ask you. I mean, is there any unsung hero that you would point to? Someone who you think was, particularly important and should get a lot of credit, who fans might not know about from behind the scenes?
There are just so many. I mean, I feel like if I name any, I'll just be forgetting so many others.
That's fair.
I think Jack Bender and Gene Higgins, who were really producing and making the show in Hawaii, are the 2 names that should be mentioned alongside mine and Carlton's and JJ's anytime that the show gets mentioned. There were a number of writers and editors in LA who I think that the fan community probably knows better than the people who are the crew is actually making the show. Zach Grobler was our production designer for many years. That's a name worth mentioning. I could run down the list. I'd never stop. I mean, I just think I'd start with Jack and Gene.
That's cool. Well, thanks so much for doing this, Damon. I mean, we love giving people a chance to, an excuse to revisit Lost, I guess, and appreciate your talking with us about it.
I really appreciate it.
Ooh, I'm still starstruck.
Me too.
So what stands out to you listening back?
I mean everything, but I loved and this I truly didn't know, I loved the backstory of which actors, the actors saying that they didn't need to know stuff about their characters, Kate Evangeline being satisfied with, we think you killed your father-in-law for, reasons.
But we don't totally know why. And she was like, all right, man.
Yeah.
That's great.
And especially the bit about Terry O'Quinn and Michael Emerson just never even asking what happened, which is just so impressive to me, that they would not even, that they're just such professionals, and that they're able to take what's on the page and do what they do with those characters, and it never even occurs to them to be you got to tell me more so that I can do this. Stunning. Right.
Well, interestingly, I agree that that's a huge testament to their abilities as actors, but it also kind of works for what we know about John and Ben as characters. John Locke doesn't need to ask. Well, he frequently asks why the island's doing what he's doing, but even if he doesn't have answers, he proceeds.
That's true. And that's true. He's going to do his thing.
And again, that probably goes back to this point that we've heard from many, many people who worked on Lost now, that the actors informed the writers, which informed the writing of the characters, and there is a little bit of all of the actors' creations in who the characters turned out to be, et cetera, et cetera.
I find that so much more compelling than if they had just had a true master plan from the beginning and everyone was in on it and everything was perfectly coordinated.
Yeah.
That feels like it would have been so sterile in comparison to the living, breathing organism that the show truly was. Like I respect it all the more for that.
Yeah, and Damon alluded to this when he talked about, we at one time envisioned a much larger role for Mr. Echo, but that didn't work out for basically personnel reasons. And so we, found creative solutions. And that is one of the fascinating challenges to me of working on something like television, where you're constantly producing, you're putting out the work at the same time that you're developing what's going to happen next. So it's impossible to have a master plan, right? Because if somebody chooses to leave the show, or if somebody, any number of things could happen.
Right.
You can't just
or an actor turns out to be better or worse or whatever it is.
Right,
yeah.
you can't just go get a new guy to play Mr. Echo.
No. Who would want that?
Yeah, so I don't know. It's a fascinating medium.
I did think it was interesting, the commentary, and I think he's, making a very good point about how if they made the show today, it would be many fewer hours, and that perhaps it would be better for that. I did, I think it's interesting that he mentioned that people don't like the first half of season 3. I actually like the first half of season 3 a lot.
Yeah.
And I know that people got annoyed with the, putting them in the cages at the Hydra Island, but there was, I don't know, I just felt like there were a lot of good, that's when they did Flashes Before Your Eyes, which was like a truly fabulous Desmond episode when his flashes start, and it's when they introduced Mikhail Bakunin.
Point being.
We
like all of Lost.
I'm glad we have 121 hours of Lost to enjoy.
Right. Well, we're down to about 90 to get through here on The Hatch.
And thank you all for being with us up until this point. We've got a whole lot of Lost left to go. We've got some fabulous interviews coming up, and starting next week with more from Leonard Dick, who wrote Collision, who's just the nicest guy to talk to and really super smart.
In the meantime, you can always chat with us on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, on Facebook at The Hatch Podcast. If you ever want to call us, you can reach us at 9546-DHARMA.
Also, thank you very much to Andy G. Cohen, who does our intro music, and to Danny Roth, who did our cover art.
We'll talk to you next week.
Namaste.